Today we are looking at an important distinction surrounding the Iraqi dinar and the frequently discussed idea of deleting 3 zeros from the currency. This subject has generated considerable attention among Iraqi dinar followers because discussions about currency restructuring can easily be misunderstood as confirmation of an immediate exchange rate change. The key message from the information we are analyzing today is simple. Discussion is not the same thing as approval, and approval is not the same thing as implementation. According to the news paragraph provided, Iraqi television had been preparing the public for the possibility of deleting zeros from the dinar. At the same time, the report emphasizes that the Council of Ministers has not made a final decision to delete 3 zeros from the currency. That distinction is extremely important because currency reform is a complex economic and administrative process. It requires more than public discussion, media coverage, or statements from commentators. A formal policy decision, an implementation framework, and communication from the responsible monetary authorities would all be important before anyone could reasonably describe such a reform as officially underway. For Iraqi dinar followers, this means we need to separate 3 different stages: an idea being discussed, a policy being approved, and a policy actually being implemented. These stages can sometimes take months or even years to move from one to another. A government can study currency reform without adopting it. It can approve a reform without immediately putting it into circulation. And even after implementation begins, the economic effects may depend on how the reform is designed. The phrase deletion of the zeros itself also needs to be understood carefully. In monetary terminology, removing zeros from banknotes can refer to a redenomination or restructuring of the currency. For example, if a country removes 3 zeros, 1,000 old units could theoretically become 1 new unit. That does not automatically mean that the currency has suddenly gained real purchasing power against foreign currencies. The important question is how prices, wages, contracts, bank accounts, exchange rates, and other financial obligations are treated during the transition. This is one of the most important points for anyone following the Iraqi dinar. A redenomination is not automatically the same thing as a revaluation. A revaluation changes the currency's official value relative to other currencies. A redenomination changes the numerical units used to represent prices and balances. Those two concepts can be discussed together, but they are not identical. So when we hear that Iraq may once again be seriously discussing the deletion of 3 zeros, the responsible interpretation is that this is potentially significant from a currency policy perspective, but it is not confirmation of a new exchange rate. There is also no implementation date identified in the information provided. Without an official timetable, it would be premature to claim that Iraqi citizens or international currency holders should expect an immediate change. Another important point is the role of the Central Bank of Iraq. The report specifically emphasizes that the CBI has not made an announcement regarding implementation. That matters because the central bank is one of the most important institutions involved in monetary policy and currency management. When discussing a major currency restructuring, statements from the central bank would carry much more weight than rumors, social media posts, or commentary from outside observers. This does not mean that discussions outside the central bank are irrelevant. Government ministries, economic advisors, financial institutions, and lawmakers can all participate in discussions about monetary reform. But when the question becomes whether a currency change has actually been approved, investors and observers should look for formal documentation and official communication rather than relying on interpretations of television programming or commentary. There is also a broader economic reason why Iraq might examine currency restructuring. Iraq's financial system has faced challenges involving banking modernization, cash usage, electronic payments, financial inclusion, and the relationship between the formal banking sector and the broader economy. A currency restructuring, if eventually adopted, would therefore need to fit into a much larger economic strategy. The short-term implications of renewed discussion are primarily about expectations and uncertainty. When reports about deleting zeros become public, currency followers naturally begin asking whether an exchange rate change is close. But expectations can move faster than actual policy. That is why responsible analysis is especially important. Until there is a formal decision and implementation schedule, the safest interpretation is that the subject remains under discussion rather than completed. For the Iraqi economy, preparation would also be a major undertaking. Any large-scale currency restructuring could involve commercial banks, government agencies, businesses, accounting systems, ATMs, cash registers, contracts, tax systems, salaries, pensions, and public communication. Citizens would need clear instructions about old and new denominations. Banks would need systems capable of processing both units during any transition period. Businesses would need to adjust their accounting and pricing systems. That means even an approved reform would not necessarily happen overnight. The long-term implications are potentially more significant, depending entirely on the structure of the reform. If Iraq eventually decides to remove zeros, the success of that policy would depend on monetary stability, fiscal discipline, confidence in the banking system, inflation management, and effective public communication. A currency reform can simplify accounting and make denominations easier to manage, but it cannot by itself solve structural economic problems. This is why followers should be cautious about claims that deleting zeros automatically means the Iraqi dinar will become dramatically more valuable against the US dollar. That conclusion does not logically follow from the concept of redenomination. The real economic outcome would depend on the policy framework and the underlying strength of the Iraqi economy. For example, imagine a hypothetical situation in which 1,000 old dinars become 1 new dinar. A person holding 1 million old dinars might then have 1,000 new dinars. But if wages, prices, debts, and other financial values are converted using the same ratio, the person's underlying purchasing power does not automatically increase by 1,000 times. The numbers on the currency change, but economic value depends on the relationship between prices, income, production, reserves, monetary policy, and confidence. That distinction is particularly important because the term RV, or revaluation, is frequently used in online Iraqi dinar discussions. A genuine revaluation would be a separate policy question. It would require an official exchange rate decision and clear communication from the relevant authorities. Therefore, today's information should not be presented as proof that an RV has been approved. The most constructive development to watch from here is official documentation. If the Iraqi government formally approves a currency restructuring proposal, that would represent a meaningful development. If the Central Bank of Iraq then publishes technical details, such as the conversion mechanism, affected denominations, timing, exchange procedures, and treatment of bank deposits, the picture would become much clearer. If an implementation date is eventually announced, that would provide another major piece of evidence. Until those developments occur, the appropriate approach is patience and verification. Iraqi dinar followers should be particularly careful with claims containing exact dates, guaranteed exchange rates, or statements that a currency reform has already been completed when no official documentation has been presented. There is nothing wrong with following the possibility of monetary reform. In fact, understanding Iraq's currency policy, banking reforms, fiscal position, and economic development can provide valuable insight into the country's financial future. But responsible analysis requires distinguishing confirmed information from interpretation and speculation. So, where does the situation stand based on the news information provided today? The idea of deleting 3 zeros from the Iraqi dinar is reportedly being discussed again, and Iraqi media coverage has reportedly been preparing the public for the possibility. However, the key point remains that the Council of Ministers has not made a final decision according to the information supplied. There is no confirmed implementation date, and there has been no stated confirmation from the Central Bank of Iraq that the reform is being implemented. That means this is a development worth watching, but it is not a reason to declare that the Iraqi dinar has already entered a new exchange rate era. The next stage is confirmation. If the government moves from discussion to a formal decision, that would materially change the story. If the central bank publishes an implementation framework, that would provide even stronger evidence. Until then, the responsible position is to recognize the significance of the discussion without turning it into an unsupported prediction. For Iraqi dinar followers, the bigger lesson is that currency reform should always be judged through official policy, economic fundamentals, and actual implementation, not simply through headlines. Iraq's monetary future will ultimately depend on how effectively its institutions manage the banking system, inflation, public finances, currency circulation, and confidence in the national financial system. We will continue to follow developments carefully and separate confirmed information from speculations so you can understand what is actually happening with the Iraqi dinar. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to subscribe to Iraqi Dinar News and stay connected for responsible and factual updates as new information becomes available. As always, remember that currency discussions can involve significant uncertainty. This content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not financial advice.